In the hidden corners of Asia, beneath layers of concrete and silence, some spirits never moved on. They linger in shadows, trapped between ritual and ruin, waiting for someone to look too closely or listen too long. This is Ghosts of Asia, where ancient beliefs bleed into modern life, and the past doesn't just haunt, it possesses. Tonight's story takes place in the heart of Seoul, in a luxury apartment tower built high above the city. Sleek, sterile, secure, or so they say. But apartment 4D holds a secret, a mirror that reflects more than just your face, a silence that listens, a reflection that moves even when you don't. When Ji-eun moved in, she didn't know about the women before her. She didn't know their names had been erased, or that someone or something was still watching through the glass. And once you see it, it sees you too. The elevator made no sound as it rose, yet Ji-eun could feel every floor tick by like a quiet heartbeat. Ding. 1. Ding. 2. Then 3. She clutched the keys tighter in her hand, the new brass edges cold against her palm. When the doors finally slid open on the 4th floor, the hallway ahead was drenched in a pale, almost sterile light, the kind that made everything feel slightly unreal. Unit 4D was at the end of the corridor, a corner unit, the best view in the building, according to the realtor. South-facing windows, high ceilings, no neighbors on one side, private, quiet, perfect for someone like her. Or so they thought. She hesitated in front of the black door, eyeing the brushed silver numbers mounted above the handle. 4D. Something about the way the D slanted, just slightly off-center, made her stomach twitch. But it was nothing, she told herself. Just new place jitters, just her overthinking, again. The key slid into the lock like it had been waiting for her. The deadbolt clicked open, and the door creaked inward with surprising resistance, as if something behind it didn't want to be disturbed. Ji-eun stepped inside. The apartment was, as promised, pristine. Cold gray floors, ivory white walls, minimalist built-in shelving. The kitchen gleamed with untouched appliances, still wrapped in their factory plastic. A faint lemon-scented cleanser clung to the air, layered atop something older, something faintly metallic. She dismissed it as pipe smell, or maybe just new paint. The realtor had left a welcome basket on the counter, instant coffee sachets, 2 cups, and a small scented candle labeled Evening Rain. Ji-eun didn't touch it. Her eyes were drawn elsewhere. The full-length mirror. It stood at the far end of the hallway, outside the bathroom. Tall, elegant, framed in brushed steel. A selling point, the listing had said. Custom installed, immovable, seamless. But Ji-eun hadn't seen it in the photos. And something about it now made her breath catch. It wasn't the mirror itself, but the reflection it held. Her reflection stood perfectly still. Too still. There was no sway in the body, no blinking, and the lighting in the glass looked subtly different, dimmer, as if the hallway on the other side was just a little older, just a little darker. She blinked, and so did her reflection. Everything snapped back into place. The mirror was just a mirror. Ji-eun had been alone for a long time, not in the dramatic broken heart way people assumed, just in the quiet, cumulative way life unfolds. After her father passed 2 years ago, there was no reason to stay in the house they once shared. And after the job moved remote, there was no reason to stay in her rundown neighborhood either. So she saved, she searched, and when Tower Jade announced a wave of move-in specials, she applied instantly. Unit 4D was too cheap. She knew it. Everyone said so. But she couldn't find a catch in the paperwork. No reports, no bad reviews. The building was barely 3 years old. There was even a convenience store downstairs and a security desk at the front. It didn't make sense, and that's what made it worse. She unpacked slowly that night, letting the silence settle around her like dust. The walls were thinner than she expected, not noisy exactly, but hollow. She could hear footsteps from above, water trickling through pipes, the faint hum of the elevator shaft even from her bedroom. At 11:47 p.m., she heard a knock. Not at the door, not on the walls, a single knock from the mirror. She froze. Her eyes darted down the hallway, past the bathroom light that flickered just once, and into the reflection. Nothing. Her own gaze stared back, sleepy and confused. No other figure, no other sound. But she'd heard it. Knock. It wasn't even loud, just a soft, low tap, like fingernails, like knuckles against glass. She rubbed her arms and turned away. The next morning, she noticed a faint smear on the mirror's surface, a handprint, slightly lower than hers would have been, palm facing inward, like someone had pressed their hand from the inside. She grabbed a cloth, but no matter how much she wiped, the mark remained. She switched to alcohol. It still didn't budge. She turned on the hallway light to inspect it further, but when she stepped back, it was gone. The glass was clear again. She exhaled and shook her head. She was tired, that's all. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. Moving is stressful. Being alone made her brain play tricks. And the ghost stories she used to binge watch at 2 a.m., yeah, those didn't help either. By day 3, the elevator started skipping her floor. Not always, just sometimes. She'd press 4, and it would pass her by, go to 5, then down again, then freeze. She had to use the stairs twice, and both times she noticed that floor 4's hallway was slightly colder. The lights buzzed more, the air felt heavier. The mail slot, too, was always slightly ajar when she got home, even though she swore she shut it each time. Her mail notifications never matched the actual deliveries. Sometimes she'd get a package addressed to someone else, always women, names she didn't know. And the building's management kept insisting that they had no record of prior tenants in 4D. That's when Ji-yoon felt it. The idea that maybe no one was supposed to live here. On her 5th night, she caught her reflection watching her. Not moving, not copying, watching. She had just finished brushing her teeth. She spat, looked up, and her reflection's head was slightly tilted. Just barely, but not in the way she had moved. It was anticipatory, curious. And her eyes, they weren't looking at her. They were looking through her, just over her shoulder, toward the darkness behind her. She spun around. Nothing. When she looked back, her reflection was normal, matching her pose, but her heart thudded unevenly in her chest. A cold sweat began to form at the base of her neck. And then, just before she turned off the light, the reflection blinked. Before she did. Just once. At 3:33 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. She didn't answer, but the screen lit up with a frozen image. It was a still frame of her sleeping. The same angle as her ceiling, her bed, her hair falling over her eyes. It was her room, but her phone had been on her nightstand the whole time. She tried to delete the call record, but the screen froze. The image stayed. The figure in the bed turned slightly, and the face that looked toward the camera was smiling. Ji-yoon stopped using the mirror after that. She draped a towel over it, stopped brushing your teeth in the hallway bathroom, stopped passing it without looking away. The image stayed behind the towel, but she could feel it, its weight, its presence. One night, she returned home to find the towel on the floor, perfectly folded, the mirror clean, clear, and her reflection already waiting. The days that followed blurred into each other, quiet, colorless, strangely heavy. The apartment had its own rhythm now. It creaked and sighed like an old animal, even though everything inside it looked brand new. Ji-yoon tried to tell herself it was nothing, that every new place came with its own noises, its own unfamiliar pulse, but she couldn't unhear it anymore. The tapping, always faint, always from the same direction, from the mirror. It came at odd hours, sometimes just before dawn, sometimes in the middle of a call, sometimes when she passed the hallway without thinking. It was never loud, but it was patient, like someone testing the surface from the other side, learning its thickness. At first, she ignored it. She blasted music, kept the hallway light on, worked late. But each time the sound came, it threaded through the air, thin and insistent, until it found her again. On the seventh night, she noticed the pipes under her sink gurgling, not with water, but with something softer, a whispering flow. She turned off the faucet. The sound didn't stop. "Hello?" she muttered before she even realized it. The whisper stopped instantly. Silence filled the apartment, wide and sharp. She stared into the drain, heart hammering. Something about that quiet felt wrong, like it wasn't the silence of nothing, but the silence of listening. Her reflection in the chrome faucet bent and wavered, the distorted oval of her face trembling. Then, in a flash of movement, it smiled. Ji-yoon fell backward, hitting her hip against the cabinet. Her eyes shot to the hallway mirror. It was still covered, the towel unmoved, but the faint sound of dripping, steady, rhythmic, began to echo through the walls. Drip, drip, drip. Not water. Footsteps. The building itself was too quiet. No children, no pets, no late-night arguments through walls. Her hallway lights flickered more now, always when she passed, never when she stood still. And then there were the dreams. She began seeing flashes of a room she didn't know, narrow, painted and faded blue, with iron bars on the window. There was always a mirror on the wall, covered with soot, and a woman sitting in front of it with her back to Ji-yoon. The woman never turned around, but she could feel her breath in the dream, slow, shallow, as if she was whispering through her. When Ji-yoon woke, her own breath came out in cold bursts. The room felt colder than the rest of the apartment. She started keeping a heater by her bed. But one morning, the heater was gone. Vanished. No signs of theft. No forced entry. When she checked the hallway camera on her phone, the feed showed her apartment door at 3 a.m. opening from the inside. Ji-yoon went to the front desk the next day, sleep-deprived and trembling. The security guard, an older man with sunken eyes, scanned the logs. There was no record of your door opening. Maybe a glitch. But when she pressed, his expression shifted. A flicker of recognition, then something like hesitation. What unit again? 4D? He froze, for just a second, but it was enough. Then, almost mechanically, he smiled. Everything's fine there. Just make sure your locks are working. She didn't miss how his hand trembled as he handed her back the clipboard. That evening, Ji-yoon stood in front of the mirror again. She had tried so hard not to look at it, but the unease had become unbearable. The towel had stayed up for a week now. The tapping had grown louder, more impatient. She reached for the cloth, her fingers brushing the soft cotton, and froze. There were faint lines pressing from beneath the fabric, finger marks, 5 of them, each pressing outward. Her breath hitched, the hallway light dimmed, flickered twice, and went out. For a heartbeat, the world went black. When the emergency backup light clicked on, the tower was gone. The mirror was uncovered, and her reflection, her exact reflection, stood with its hand still raised, pressed against the glass. But Ji-yoon's own hand was at her side. She stumbled backward. The reflection didn't move. It stayed frozen, palm flat, eyes hollow. Then, slowly, it began to lower its hand. Its movements were smooth but slightly delayed, as if underwater. And for the first time, Ji-yoon noticed something in the reflection she hadn't seen before. The reflection wasn't of her hallway. The light behind it was redder, older. The walls were cracked. There was soot. The air looked heavy, like a place that had burned long ago and never cooled. Her heart began to race. She reached for her phone, wanting to film it, needing to prove this was real. But the screen stayed black, no matter how many times she tapped it. Her reflection tilted its head and smiled. The exact same smile from her dream. That night she didn't sleep. She sat in her bed, lights on, clutching her phone, even though the battery was dead. At some point between the hours, she heard a soft rustle from the hallway. She forced herself up, each step slow, deliberate. The mirror gleamed faintly under the light, but the reflection wasn't hers anymore. It was a room again, that same narrow room with peeling blue paint, and there in the reflection sat the woman, the one from her dreams, combing her long black hair, each stroke deliberate and slow. Ji-yoon whispered before she could stop herself, "Who are you?" The woman stopped brushing. Slowly, she turned her head, though her face remained blurred, like something seen through fogged glass. Her lips moved soundlessly. Ji-yoon leaned closer. And then the whisper came, faint, almost lost under the hum of the light. "En-ha." The next morning, Ji-yoon woke on the floor. She didn't remember falling asleep there. The mirror looked normal again, reflecting only her tired eyes and pale face. But written faintly in the condensation that had formed overnight were two words: "Don't blink." Over the following days, she started noticing other things, small but unsettling. Her phone screen would flash whenever she passed the mirror. Her face would appear twice in photo previews. And whenever she turned off the lights, she would catch a second pair of footsteps following hers, just slightly delayed. Once she tried covering the mirror again, but every morning the cloth would be gone, folded neatly on her bed, as though returned by invisible hands. By the 10th day, she stopped trying. Something in her had shifted, part fear, part fascination. She wanted to know who Unha was, why she was there, what she wanted. So she began talking to the mirror, softly, cautiously. At first, nothing happened, but sometimes when she asked a question, she could hear faint scratching from within the glass, as if someone were writing an answer from the other side. And one night after she whispered, "Are you still here?" a single word appeared in the faint fog that formed on the surface. "Always." That was the first night Ji-yoon dreamed of fire. The asylum walls burning, women screaming, mirrors cracking as faces pressed against them, desperate and trapped. And through it all, the same voice whispering from somewhere beyond the flames, "Don't let your reflection blink first." She woke up gasping, the faint smell of smoke still lingering in the air. When she looked at the mirror again, her reflection was already waiting, eyes open, unblinking. Morning sunlight barely reached the corners of apartment 4D. The windows faced south, but the building across the street stood too close, swallowing the light before it could truly enter. Everything inside seemed dimmer now, as if the air itself had thickened overnight. Ji-yoon had stopped opening the curtains altogether. She couldn't stand the faint outline of her reflection on the glass anymore. It was never in sync, not perfectly, not like it used to be. She kept herself busy instead. She worked longer hours on her editing projects, filled the silence with soft music, and ignored the faint creaks in the walls. But the quiet here had a way of bending around sound, swallowing it, stretching it, turning every echo into something almost human. When the fridge hummed, it sounded like a breath. When the pipes moaned, they whispered her name. When she walked past the mirror, she could hear faint tapping, just once, like a greeting. That morning, she decided to deep clean. It wasn't because the apartment was dirty, it was because she wanted to feel in control again, to make every inch of the space her own. She started with the kitchen, scrubbing the counters, pulling out drawers, vacuuming corners. Behind the lower cabinet near the sink, she found something wedged deep between the wood and the wall. It looked like a thin leather notebook, dusty and warped from moisture. When she pulled it free, flakes of black mold scattered into the air. She set it on the counter and stared at it for a long time. The cover was unmarked, except for faint indentations, as if someone had scratched something into it and then tried to remove it. The pages inside were brittle, yellowed at the edges. Most of it was blank, but a few pages near the middle were filled with handwriting, small, hurried, and uneven. She flipped through carefully. The first legible entry read, April 2. The tapping came again last night. It's getting louder. The mirror doesn't show me anymore. It shows her. I think her name is Unha. Ji-yoon's fingers went cold. She turned the page. April 4. I can't sleep. When I do, I dream of burning walls. The nurses are screaming, but there are no nurses anymore, only her. She says the mirror is a door, but I don't know what she means. She swallowed hard. There was a name written at the bottom of that page, faint, half erased. Yoonmi. Ji-yoon recognized the name immediately. It had appeared once, weeks ago, when a wrong package had been left at her door. The label read, Yoonmi, Unit 4D. But when she'd brought it to the office, the clerk had shaken her head and said there was no record of a tenant by that name. She stared at the diary again. The ink had bled through some pages, the words overlapping, tangled, almost desperate. April 10. I tried covering the mirror again. It won't stay covered. She doesn't want it dark anymore. She wants to see. April 11. There's someone behind the wall. I can hear her breathing when the lights go out. April 13. She says she can take away my pain, that I just have to let her in. I don't think she's lying. The last page was half torn. The writing trailed off mid-sentence. April 14. I looked into her eyes tonight. She smiled. I think she... The line ended there, abruptly. A long streak of black ink crossed the rest of the page, like a sudden violent motion of the pen. Ji-yoon's chest tightened. She flipped the notebook over, looking for anything else, a clue, a return address, a sign that this was all a coincidence. But there was nothing, only faint smudges, and on the back cover, the outline of a handprint. It wasn't ink. It wasn't dirt. It looked burned. A perfect palm-shaped shadow pressed into the leather from the inside. That night she couldn't focus. The words from the diary crawled through her head. She tried to watch something light, a cooking show on her laptop, but the reflection on the screen kept flickering, like someone standing just behind her. At 2 a.m., the power went out. No thunder, no storm, no reason. The darkness filled every corner of the apartment. Ji-yoon's phone flashlight cut through the air in shaky circles. She checked the fuse box. Nothing tripped. Everything looked normal, until she turned toward the hallway. The mirror was glowing, a faint, cold shimmer pulsing softly from its center, like breath against ice. Her heart pounded. She stepped closer. The light wasn't reflecting from anything. It was coming through the glass, bleeding outward like the shimmer of moonlight beneath deep water. and in that glow, faint words began to form across the surface, written in fog, one letter at a time. "Don't believe her." Her breath caught. "Who?" she whispered. The letters shifted, rearranged themselves. "The one behind you." She froze. Her hand trembled as she slowly turned around, but the hallway was empty. No sound, no movement. When she looked back, the words were gone. The mirror was dark again. The next morning, she went downstairs to the management office. The young woman at the reception desk smiled politely as Ji-yoon explained she wanted to ask about the previous tenant of her unit. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the woman said, eyes flicking nervously to her monitor. "There are no public records for that. I found a diary, someone named Yoonmi. She lived in 4D before me." The receptionist hesitated. "Ma'am, are you sure about that name?" "Yes," Ji-yoon said. "Why?" The woman leaned closer, lowering her voice. "There were some issues during construction, accidents. They say one of the inspection staff disappeared on site, a woman." "What was her name?" "I don't know. The file's sealed, but please don't ask the security guard. He doesn't like talking about it." When Ji-yoon stepped into the elevator, the overhead light flickered twice before going out completely. The walls of the elevator glimmed with faint metallic reflections, hundreds of them. In each, her face stared back, slightly distorted, slightly delayed. As the elevator descended, one reflection didn't follow. It stayed still, staring straight ahead. And just before the doors opened, it raised its hand and waved. Back inside her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed, gripping the diary. She could still feel the faint warmth of that burned handprint through the leather. Something in her told her she wasn't the first person to read it, and she wouldn't be the last. That night, she dreamed again. The same narrow room, walls peeling, air thick with smoke. The mirror hung crooked on the wall, its surface rippling like liquid. A woman sat before it, back straight, long black hair reaching past her shoulders. Her head turned slowly, but this time she saw her face clearly. Burned skin, hollow eyes, and a mouth that smiled too wide. The woman lifted her hand toward the mirror, palm pressed against the glass. And on the other side, in the reflection, Ji-yoon saw her own hand reaching back. When she woke, her palm was warm, and on the surface of her hallway mirror, a new handprint had appeared, slightly smaller than hers. Night had begun to feel heavier. Ji-yoon no longer moved freely in her apartment. She crept, listening, always waiting for something to change when she turned her back. Every hallway, every shadow seemed to breathe differently, like the walls themselves were learning her rhythm. The mirror was no longer a piece of furniture. It had become a presence, an eye, a door. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she could hear something pressing against it from the other side. Not fingers this time, not hands, a face, a slow, dragging breath across the glass. She would wake to the sound of fog forming on its surface, only to find her own image staring back, but with eyes too wide and a mouth that didn't move with hers. She didn't sleep well anymore. When she did, her dreams were strange, flickering, like memories that didn't belong to her. It was just after 3 a.m. when her phone rang again. No name, no number, just a black screen vibrating softly on her nightstand. Her heart clenched. She picked it up with shaking fingers. The screen didn't show the usual green accept or red decline options, just one single prompt: watch. Her finger hovered, her breath caught, and still she tapped. The screen lit up, fuzzy and dark, a video feed. At first she thought it was broken, just blackness and static hiss, But then the image sharpened. It was her room, her own bedroom, from above, as if the camera were mounted on the ceiling. The feed showed her sleeping, her body curled under the blanket, her breathing steady. But something was wrong with the angle. There was no camera on her ceiling. And the timestamp in the corner? 3 a.m. Exactly now. Ji-yoon sat frozen in her bed, watching herself sleep on the screen, even as she was wide awake. And then, on the screen, she saw the blanket shift. Her sleeping body moved. Slowly, the figure turned its head toward the camera and smiled. A soft, unnatural curve, a mouth that stretched wider than hers ever could. Ji-yoon screamed and dropped the phone. The screen cracked against the floor, but the video kept playing, the face now staring up at her from below, watching her. Her own face, but not her. She left the apartment that morning without brushing her teeth, without looking in any mirrors. She didn't even lock the door. She sat on the curb outside the building, gripping her knees, waiting for the sun to rise higher. People passed her, giving her strange looks. A woman in pajama pants, barefoot, trembling. The front desk security guard approached her after an hour. "You all right, miss?" She looked up at him, the same guard as before, old, wiry, with a face that had seen too much. She hesitated. Did something happen in 4D? He looked at her carefully, then sighed. "I told him they should seal that unit off." "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said slowly, "there's always someone who thinks they can stay in that room, that they're stronger, that they're just imagining things." "What things?" "The mirrors," he whispered. "That building was put up over something old. The asylum burned, but not everything inside was destroyed. The observation rooms had one-way glass, mirrors meant to watch without being seen. Some of them were never removed. They just built over them, buried them behind new glass." She felt her stomach drop. "So the mirror in my hallway was never meant to look into. It was meant to look out." That night, Ji-yoon didn't turn on any lights. She walked through her apartment in silence, letting the dark wrap around her like a blanket. She kept her phone face down. She unplugged the bathroom light, and she stood in front of the mirror. It shimmered faintly, even in the dark, as if it made its own light now. "Who are you?" she whispered. Her reflection answered. It didn't speak. Its mouth didn't move, but the air grew colder. The walls seemed to pulse, and slowly a single name formed in condensation across the mirror's center. Eun-ha. She reached out without thinking. Her hand hovered just above the glass. The mirror felt warm, alive. When her fingers finally touched it, the light in the hallway flickered, and for a briefest second, she saw something behind her reflection. A room. Peeling blue walls, a barred window, a flickering overhead light that swayed back and forth like it had been swinging for years. And a shape. A woman, standing just behind her, eyes hollow, skin burned, hair hanging in clumps, watching her, smiling. Ji-yoon staggered backward, gasping. The light steadied. The mirror returned to normal. Her reflection looked just like her again. But something had changed. The eyes were colder, the skin more pale, and for the first time she realized the reflection wasn't copying her anymore. It was leading. The next few days blurred together. Ji-yoon stopped opening the windows. She blocked the peephole at her door. She disconnected her laptop camera and turned her mirrors around. all except the one in the hallway. That one stayed. It wouldn't leave, even if she wanted it gone. She tried covering it again. It didn't work. She tried pushing it. It wouldn't budge. She even called the building contractor, who told her over the phone, "That mirror's not part of the drywall. It's built into the structure." When she asked why, he went quiet. "That unit used to be something else, you know. The dimensions aren't standard. That wall is thicker than it should be. It used to be, I don't know, some kind of observation room, I think. The old blueprints got lost in the fire." "What fire?" "I shouldn't be talking to you," he muttered and hung up. That night, the video calls started coming more frequently. Each time it was the same. No number, no ringtone, just a screen that turned on and showed her sleeping. But the more she watched them, the more she noticed. It wasn't just her face that changed. The background did too. The wallpaper behind her would sometimes be stained. The walls would look cracked. The window looked smaller. She was being shown not her bedroom, but someone else's. Someone from before. Someone who had lived and died in 4D. She began recording the calls, storing them in a hidden folder. Each one was slightly different. In some, the figure in bed sat up and stared at the camera. In others, it got out of bed and walked off screen. Once, it stood completely still in the center of the room, eyes closed, mouth open in a silent scream. She played that one back over and over, and just before the video ended, the figure opened its eyes and whispered, "You invited me." That night, Ji-yoon awoke with dried blood on her lip and a bruise on her left wrist. She didn't remember how she got it. Her fingernails were cracked. Her phone was dead, even though she had charged it the night before. And in the hallway, the mirror showed her sleeping, even though she was awake. Ji-yoon stopped trusting her eyes. It happened gradually, the way people slowly stop trusting old clocks. One day they tick wrong, the next they skip an hour, and then suddenly you realize you're late and the whole world moved without you. She would blink and the reflection would change. She would blink again and it would be watching her. Not mirroring, just waiting. It was the third night without sleep when she found herself standing in front of the mirror again, barefoot, trembling, unsure how long she'd been there. The hallway light above her buzzed, dimming and brightening with a slow pulsing rhythm. Her reflection stood perfectly still, eyes open, unblinking. She leaned forward slowly, so did the reflection. But the moment her eyes fluttered shut, even for a second, she felt a shift, a presence, like something behind the glass had stepped closer. She snapped her eyes open, her heart pounding, and stared at her own image. It was no longer aligned with her. The head was tilted just slightly left, and the lips were parted, like it was about to speak. Ji-yoon backed away, pressing her back against the opposite wall. The reflection didn't move. The next day, she didn't leave her apartment, not even for food. She sipped water in silence, watching the mirror from across the living room like it was an animal that might charge if she looked away. Sometime near dusk, there was a soft knock on the door. Not the mirror, the front door. She jumped, her pulse raced. Another knock, slower this time. She approached it carefully, eye pressed to the peehole. No one, but a faint voice came through the wood, muffled, trembling, an old man. "Miss, don't let it copy your breath." She froze. "They always blink too soon." She yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. That night she remembered something the security guard had said. Some mirrors were never meant to be looked into. They were meant to look out. She found herself writing that sentence over and over in her notebook without meaning to. Each time her handwriting changed slightly, slanted, narrow, like someone else had taken over the pen. She called her mother the next morning just to hear a familiar voice, but halfway through the conversation, her mother paused. "Sweetheart, are you using one of those voice filters again?" June furrowed her brow. "No, why? You sound doubled, like someone else is speaking with you." Her blood ran cold. "Is someone in the room with you?" She hung up. That evening, June caught herself watching the mirror as she ate dinner, watching not her own reflection, but the delay, a momentary pause between bite and bite. She lifted her spoon. Her reflection did too, but half a second late. Her eyes widened. The mirror was no longer a reflection. It was a recording, a performance, a mask. Something inside was copying her, learning her. She returned to the diary. The pages were more brittle now, as if aging faster in her presence. One corner flaked away in her hand. At the very back, beneath a taped-down sheet, she found a page she hadn't noticed before. Faded red ink. "If you see her eyes move before yours, it's too late. She needs your blink. That's the trade." Underneath, a single phrase written in shaky Korean. "그녀는 깜빡임을 먹는다. She feeds on the blink." June began testing it. She would sit in front of the mirror for hours, staring at her own reflection. She wouldn't move, wouldn't blink, wouldn't breathe too loud. It became a game of nerves, and every time her eyes burned and blurred, and the reflex to blink became unbearable, she'd see it. The other her, smiling softly, waiting. She started taping her eyelids open. She used drops to stop the dryness. She kept a spray bottle nearby to mist her face when her vision dimmed. Her reflection began to shift more often. It would mimic her movements, but impatiently. The timing became more aggressive. If she leaned left, it leaned a second before her. If she twitched, it anticipated it. And once, just once, it blinked first. Her blood froze, because that was the rule. The reflection always followed. But now it was leading, and that meant it was ready. The building grew darker over the following days. Hallway lights stayed off longer. Her keycard flickered when she swiped in. Elevators stalled. Her neighbors grew silent. No deliveries arrived, no mail. One night she called the security guard again. But someone else answered. A woman. "There's no guard on duty tonight, miss. The night guard passed away." "How?" "We aren't too sure. But burns." She set up cameras in the hallway, cheap ones. She pointed one at the mirror and left it recording overnight. In the morning she checked the footage. Most of it was silent. But at exactly 3:03 a.m., the camera shook, the mirror pulsed, and for 6 full seconds, the reflection stepped forward, not just moved. It walked toward the glass and smiled, a wide, cracked, burned smile, before vanishing back into stillness. She smashed the mirror that night. She took a hammer, wrapped the handle in cloth, and drove it hard into the glass. It didn't shatter, it didn't bend, it didn't react. And in the reflection, her image was gone. Only the room behind the glass remained. That burned hallway, that swinging light. And standing there, alone, Unha. She turned and ran. Out of the apartment, down the stairwell. She ran until her knees gave out on the second floor. When she finally looked back, toward the stairwell behind her. She saw herself standing at the top, or something that looked like her. It didn't move, didn't breathe. It just stared, eyes wide, unblinking. The library didn't smell like dust. It smelled like bleach and ink, new pages, plastic folders, sterile light. But even there, among the quiet hum of fluorescent tubes and the occasional rustle of paper, Ji-eun couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her, that something still knew where she was. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed the words into the archive terminal. Asylum fire, Seoul, Tower Jade construction site, historical records. The search returned nothing useful. She added a name, Yoon-mi, nothing. Then she added one more term, half-whispered, as if the computer might hear her fear. Yoon-ha. The screen flashed once, and then a single article appeared. It was dated 18 years ago. The headline was brief. Unidentified fire destroys closed psychiatric facility on Bampo Hill. 7 dead, 2 missing. Ji-eun leaned closer. The image was low resolution, a grainy, sepia-toned photograph of a crumbling building mid-collapse, smoke pouring from broken windows. There were no people in the photo, no names, just a caption. Former Yongwol Women's Psychiatric Center, abandoned since 1992, burned to the ground under unclear circumstances. Arson suspected. No formal investigation followed. She clicked deeper. The article was thin. A few quotes from neighbors. Mentions of strange smells, broken windows. One line stood out. The facility was closed after multiple allegations of mistreatment and unauthorized rituals involving patient isolation and mirror therapy. Ji-eun sat back. Her breath slowed. Mirror therapy. The term sounded clinical, even harmless, but she knew now, knew in her bones that what happened there had nothing to do with healing. She printed the article and folded it into her coat. As she left the building, she looked once into the reflection of the glass entry door and saw a woman behind her, not moving, not breathing, just standing. When she turned, there was no one. She returned to the apartment around dusk. The air in Tower Jade felt heavier now, like the whole structure held its breath as she passed through. As she stepped into 4D, the light in the hallway above her flickered violently, and then stayed off. She didn't bother with the switch. She had already memorized the way by touch. But as she passed the mirror, still cold, still impenetrable, she felt the air bend, like heat, like fire, like memory. Later that night, she searched online using archived construction permits. She traced Tower Jade's foundations, and then she saw it. The blueprint overlay, the old Asylum building's layout buried beneath the skyscraper. Unit 4D aligned perfectly with a room labeled Observation Chamber 7. Not a patient's room, a room for watching patients. It had no entrance from the inside, only a one-way mirror, a steel chair bolted to the floor, a small wall vent for voice recording, and a note scrawled at the margin of the blueprint scan. This wall cannot be breached, reinforced during last ritual session. Lock from mirror side only. Ji-eun's hand hovered over the print key, but before she could click, her screen turned black. A reflection appeared, not hers. A woman, burned, smiling, whispering something from the other side of the glass. She didn't remember falling asleep, but she woke to heat, not fire, sweat. Her sheets were soaked, her window was closed, and the temperature in the room read 41 degrees Celsius, as if something had been breathing heat into the walls. The mirror fogged with condensation, and across the surface a new message appeared. They watched us burn. She couldn't stay silent anymore. She went back to the front desk. She found the daytime building manager, a younger man in a tight suit who smiled too quickly and blinked too much. I need to know what happened here before Tower Jade was built, before me. He laughed nervously. Miss, I think you're overthinking. These things, there was a fire. There were deaths. There was a woman named Un-ha. His face twitched. She stepped closer. You knew. He looked around, then lowered his voice. I've only worked here a year, but even I know not to walk past 4D after midnight. The cameras, they stop working. Phones glitch, and people who live there. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Later that night, she found an old forum thread buried on a Korean message board. The title? Tower Jade, The Fire Beneath. There were only a few posts. Most were vague, urban legends, stories about hearing screams in the elevators, of mirrors fogging with names, of power outages at 3 a.m. sharp. But one post was long, dated 4 years ago. The user's name had been deleted. I lived in 4D for 6 days. On the 5th night, I stopped seeing myself in the mirror. On the 6th, my reflection tried to speak without me. The landlord said the unit was built over a room where they used to watch women scream through glass. They were trying to cure them of their impurity, of their grief, of their silence. They made them stare at their reflections until they broke, until someone else looked back. Some say those spirits got trapped between the mirrors when the fire came. Others say they never left, that they found new women to stare through. Whatever you do, don't blink first. Ji-eun leaned back in her chair. The screen flickered. The power in her apartment dimmed and came back, like lungs taking a slow, shallow breath. She walked to the mirror one last time that night. The reflection was waiting. But it wasn't her. Not anymore. The face had changed, the skin darker, scorched. The eyes were empty, the smile cracked and broken. And behind her, through the glass, the flames burned. Not metaphorical, not imagined. Actual fire. Walls blackening, lights swinging, and shadows moving behind the flames. The outlines of women, dozens of them, silent, watching. Then one of them stepped forward. Not Un-ha, another. A face without eyes, hair burned down to the scalp. She reached toward the glass and whispered, "There were 9 of us. We never left. The mirror is not yours." June didn't sleep for 2 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt heat licking at the edges of her dreams, fire she couldn't see but could hear, screams blurred with static, a woman's whisper pressed against her ear like breath through glass. The apartment had grown quiet again, but not peacefully. It was the stillness of something waiting. On the 3rd night, the bathroom light began to flicker. She'd left it switched off, but the bulb pulsed anyway, a faint rhythmic strobe leaking under the door. When she pushed the door open, she heard a faint click, a tiny mechanical sound above her head. She looked up. The plastic casing of the ceiling light hung slightly open, its screws half melted as if the heat of the bulb had warped it. And wedged behind the fixture was a small, dust-coated USB drive. June stared at it for a long time before touching it. The metal casing was warm, impossibly warm, as though it had been resting in sunlight, even though the room was cold. She plugged it into her laptop. The drive contained 7 video files, each labeled only by date, all from a single month, 4 years ago. Each file began the same way: a static-filled screen, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, and then the image of a young woman sitting on the floor in front of a mirror. The same mirror, the same hallway, Unit 4D. The woman's face was pale, sleepless. Her eyes flicked to the lens every few seconds, wary, as though afraid something would crawl through the camera itself. "My name's Yoon-mi," she whispered. "If anyone finds this, please don't stay here. Please don't look in the mirror after midnight." Her voice shook. She exhaled sharply as if trying to steady herself. "It started with dreams, then recordings. I'd wake up and find new videos on my phone of me sleeping. But the angle was wrong. It wasn't my phone camera. I think it was hers." The woman turned toward the mirror. Her reflection sat perfectly still, but her own shoulders trembled. "Her name's Un-ha. She said she can help me forget." Static crackled across the screen. For half a second, the reflection moved on its own, the mouth smiling, whispering something soundless. Then the feed cut out. She clicked the next file. Yoon-mi was sitting closer to the mirror now, her hair unwashed, eyes ringed in black. "I tried to leave," she said, voice flat. "I packed, I called the elevator, it didn't come. The stairs go down one floor, then loop back up. No one answers the doorbell downstairs." Her laugh was short and broken. "I think the building keeps me here. I think the walls remember her." She looked up suddenly, startled by a sound off camera, a faint knock, delicate, rhythmic. The same sound Triun had heard every night. Knock, knock, knock. The camera wobbled as June picked it up and turned toward the sound. The mirror filled the frame, smooth, clear, endless. And there, in the reflection, stood another woman, behind her, burned, expressionless. The feed cut to black. The third file was almost silent. June sat in total darkness, whispering to the camera. "She says she was one of them, one of the patients. They called it therapy. They made them stare into mirrors until they couldn't tell who they were. When the fire started, they locked the doors so no one could run." A faint glow flickered behind her, the mirror breathing light like an ember. "She said the fire wasn't an accident. It was a ritual. They wanted to seal the pain inside the glass. She was the last one left." Her voice dropped. "She said I could help her finish it." Then the image distorted. The audio warped into a low, inhuman hum. The reflection leaned forward. Yoon-mi didn't move, and the screen went black again. The fourth file was almost silent. Yoon-mi's camera shook violently as she ran through the apartment. The image blurred, lights flashing, shadows crawling up the walls like hands reaching from the floor. "She's in the mirror! She's in the mirror!" The words echoed as the video cut and the next clip opened with silence. The mirror was shattered, cracks webbed across the surface, glowing faintly red from the light behind them. And in those cracks, faint outlines of faces. Dozens. The last file was different. It wasn't recorded by Yoon-mi. The camera was still, fixed. The date was blank, the image grainy, black and white. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then slowly, something crawled into frame. A woman's silhouette emerging from the mirror, the body half solid, half smoke. She moved like liquid shadow, the sound of glass splintering with every step. She stood in the middle of the hallway, turned toward the camera, and whispered a single word. "June." The screen cut to static. June slammed the laptop shut, heart hammering. That was impossible. Her name hadn't existed when those files were made. No one could have known. She unplugged the drive, threw it into a drawer, and pressed her palms against her face. Her breath came ragged and shallow. Behind her, the hallway light flickered once. When she looked up, the mirror was clear again, but the cracks from the last video were now etched faintly across its surface, invisible unless the light hit at the right angle. She stepped closer and whispered, "What do you want from me?" The air trembled, the glass rippled like water, and a voice, soft, broken, childlike, whispered back, "To remember." June backed away slowly. The temperature in the room plummeted. Frost formed along the edges of the glass, spreading outward in delicate, branching veins. And within that frost, words appeared, letter by letter. "Help me finish it." Her reflection smiled, and behind it, in the smoky, glowing world beyond the mirror, Yunmi stood watching, her face half burned, half beautiful, whispering soundlessly as the light behind her flickered like fire. The diary had changed. It shouldn't have. The pages were old, half crumbling, water-damaged from time and neglect. But when Ji-yoon opened it that morning, there were new words written where only faint ink stains had once been. A passage scrawled in red, jagged letters across 2 pages. "She's not trapped in the mirror. The mirror is her mouth. She speaks through reflection. She feeds through memory." And beneath that, circled over and over until the paper tore, "The ritual must be finished." Ji-yoon didn't know what that meant, not yet. But the answers were coming faster now. Whispers in her sleep, images in puddles, voices in turned-off screens. They didn't feel like hallucinations anymore. They felt like instructions. She spent the next hours cross-referencing everything she could about mirror rituals, not the modern ones, but ancient Korean rites, forgotten village customs, pre-shamanic observations of death, purification, and soul entrapment. She uncovered a rare term used in rural exorcisms before the 1900s, Gyeol Song, the mirror spirit, a belief that reflections could retain fragments of the soul, especially if someone died violently while looking into their own eyes. These spirits were known to become parasitic, appearing as reflections, feeding off memory, trauma, and sleep. A scholar's footnote described one specific punishment ritual for women accused of madness or spiritual corruption. She was seated alone before a sealed mirror. The light was removed. The others watched through the mirror's back. If her reflection moved on its own, she was lost. That phrase repeated in her mind like a heartbeat. If her reflection moved on its own, she was lost. Ji-yoon returned to the diary. She flipped to the very back, peeling away the last glued page. Beneath it was something different. A drawing. Charcoal lines etched into the yellowed paper. A room, a mirror, and a woman kneeling before it in the dark, a candle lit behind her. Symbols circled her body, not words but shapes, overlapping moons, a closed eye, a mouth stitched shut. And at the bottom of the page, written in shaky script, "To release her, she must see you fully. No light, no sound, no blink." That night, Ji-yoon waited. She turned off every light, blocked the hallway windows, unplugged her fridge, her computer, even her phone. She lit a single candle, placed it behind her, and sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the mirror. The glass loomed above her, tall and cold. It didn't reflect her, not anymore. What it showed was something deeper. The scorched hallway, the red light, the cracked walls of the asylum, peeled and blackened from fire, and sitting in the center, mirroring her posture, Eun-ha. Ji-yoon didn't speak. She remembered the instructions: no sound, no blink, just watch. The flame behind her flickered violently. The shadows in the mirror danced like smoke. Eun-ha lifted her head. Her skin was burned along the cheeks, her eyes hollow but filled with terrible memory. And slowly, she mouthed the words, "Do you see me now?" Ji-yoon didn't move, didn't breathe. Her eyes stung from the dryness. The mirror rippled, like heat above fire. The images began to shift. She saw visions, a room full of women forced to kneel in front of mirrors, guards behind glass taking notes, a woman screaming, another breaking her own nose against the glass, trying to escape her reflection. She saw Eun-ha, bound, alone, lit only by a single candle. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to the mirror. Her reflection didn't match. And then the fire, rushing through the halls, locking doors, searing flesh, trapping them all inside with their reflections. The ritual had never been about cleansing. It had been containment, a punishment disguised as healing. Ji-yoon sat motionless, tears brimming in her dry eyes. She couldn't blink. Not yet. Eun-ha reached forward. The mirror pulsed, and the whisper came, not through her ears, but through her bones. "Finish it." Ji-yoon blinked. Just once. The candle behind her snuffed out instantly. Darkness swallowed everything. A deep howling wind filled her ears. The mirror screamed, not in sound, but in feeling. And when she opened her eyes, she was no longer in her apartment. She was in the observation room, the old one, walls blackened, light swinging from a single cord, a trashed chair bolted to the floor. She turned around. The mirror was behind her, but it no longer showed her. It showed her apartment, empty, and through it, she saw her own body sitting cross-legged, staring blankly forward. But she wasn't inside it. She was now on the other side. She tried to scream, but there was no sound, only her breath fogging the cold mirror. In the reflection, her body blinked. Then it smiled. The first thing Ji-yoon noticed was the smell. Burned dust, wet smoke. The kind of scent that clings to the lungs and never leaves. When she turned around, the walls pulsed faintly, breathing in and out like living skin. The floor was slick beneath her palms, and when she looked down, her reflection stared back from a surface that wasn't glass. It was liquid, trembling as though the world itself were holding its breath. On the other side of the mirror, she could still see her apartment, still see her body. Her double sat perfectly still, head tilted slightly, lips curved in a faint smile. The same faint smile Una always wore. "Stop!" Ji-yoon whispered, voice raw and strange. The sound echoed in the wrong direction, inward, deeper into the black corridor that stretched behind her. And from that darkness, a voice answered, "You called me here." The corridor's end glowed with the red pulse of fire. Shadows moved across it, shapes of women, their faces blurred by smoke, each one pressing their palms against invisible walls. They weren't screaming, they were whispering. The sound came in layers, prayers, apologies, lullabies, curses, 1,000 voices murmuring at once. And over them all, a single tone rose, a hum so low and steady it made her bones ache. Una's voice. Ji-yoon stumbled backward until she hit the mirror again. The surface rippled beneath her touch, warm like skin. She could still see the apartment, faintly, her desk, her bed, the empty air where she used to exist. Her reflection stood and began walking toward the camera she had left on her laptop. It leaned in close, its eyes wide. Then it looked directly at her through the glass. "It's your turn." The screen on her laptop flickered and went dark. Ji-yoon pounded the mirror, screaming soundlessly. Her fists hit something that felt half solid, half alive. The reflection followed each motion with perfect precision. Every strike mirrored a second late, like the delay of an echo. Then slowly, her reflection stopped. It no longer copied her. It simply watched. A crack spidered across the surface, glowing faintly white. The hum in the hallway grew louder, and from the other side, she heard the familiar rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. Each hit came from behind her, from inside the burned corridor. She turned. The women in the fire were closer now, their faces clearer. One of them stepped forward, eyes milky, lips burned away. She reached out and pressed her blackened fingers against Ji-yoon's shoulder. The touch was impossibly cold. "We were never buried. We were sealed." Ji-yoon's throat tightened. "Sealed where?" "Here, in her, in every mirror that survived." Another voice joined, higher, rasping. "We only see what we are shown. We want to see light again. But she wants to be light." The air began to distort. Heat shimmered through the corridor as if the fire were returning. "Go!" one of the women cried, "before she takes your place completely." Ji-yoon spun back to the mirror. Her reflection was gone. In its place stood Una, clear, perfect, unburned. She was beautiful, radiant, untouched by ash or time. Her eyes were not hateful. They were hungry. "You don't understand," she said softly. "You see me as a curse, but I was only ever trying to escape. They made me watch myself burn over and over until I forgot my own face. I only wanted a body again." Ji-yoon shook her head. "No, you can't have mine." Una smiled sadly. "You already gave it." The mirror brightened, light pouring through the cracks like liquid silver. Her hand sank into the surface as if gravity had flipped. The light pulled her forward, dragging her chest against the glass. For a moment she saw everything at once. You and me kneeling on the floor, whispering the same prayer. The security guard sealing a report marked "No incident." The construction workers pouring new cement around an old frame. The fire returning, over and over, forever contained. And through it all, Una's whisper, "You looked too long. You blinked first." She woke on the floor of her apartment, or what she thought was her apartment. The air was heavy. The light was wrong. The walls looked slightly scorched. Her throat burned like she had swallowed smoke. But everything else seemed ordinary. The mirror stood before her, intact, clean. And when she looked into it, her reflection smiled back. Maybe it was over. Maybe it had only been a hallucination. She touched her face, warm, real. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number, no caller ID. She hesitated, then answered. Static filled her ear, and beneath it, her own voice whispered, "Let me out." She dropped the phone. The mirror trembled, and in its surface, the reflection of her apartment began to peel away, revealing the scorched hallway behind it once more. Una's hand pressed against the inside of the glass, matching hers perfectly. Their eyes met, their movements synchronized again. One last whisper filled the room. "You can't seal fire. You can only feed it." The lights flickered, once, twice, and went dark. When they came back on, Only one figure stood in apartment 4D. She smiled at her reflection, and the reflection smiled first.
The woman across the hall was the first to notice. She wasn't nosy, not the kind to pry. She kept to herself, wore slippers in the hallway, and never looked anyone in the eye. But she noticed patterns: silence where sound should be, movement where stillness used to live, and apartment 4D had changed. For the past week, the girl who lived there, pale, quiet, polite, had stopped answering the mail delivery knock. Packages piled up at the door. The hallway began to smell like plastic and damp cardboard. But that wasn't what made the woman speak up. It was the mirror. One night, as she stepped out to leave her trash by the chute, she glanced toward the darkened hallway of 4D and saw her own reflection. Except she hadn't turned her head yet. Management didn't take her seriously. They never did. "She probably just moved out," the clerk said, waving his hand. "People leave without notice all the time." "But she left her shoes," said the woman, "inside the door, and the light stays on." "She'll come back." The clerk didn't tell her that Unit 4D was marked special status in the building's internal database, flagged for high tenant turnover and unexplained disruptions in electrical systems. He didn't tell her that the maintenance log had 5 incidents in the past 6 years labeled tenant instability. He didn't say that one of the cleaning staff had quit after claiming to see herself walking through the hallway while she stood perfectly still. Because that would require someone to listen, and no one ever really listened. Ji-yoon's phone was found first. It was still plugged into the wall, battery fully charged, screen black. When the building tech opened it to log an inspection photo, it powered on without prompt and played a video. Not from the phone's gallery, from the mirror's perspective. The screen showed Ji-yoon walking through her apartment in reverse. Not reversed video, but reversed logic. Her hands moved before her arms. Her feet touched the ground before her legs bent, and every time she turned, her reflection didn't follow. It led. The tech dropped the phone, the screen cracked, and the video vanished. A new woman moved in 2 weeks later. Cheap rent, top floor, city view. She didn't ask questions. She was fresh out of a breakup, eager to disappear into something new. The agent barely looked at her ID before handing her the keys. "Unit 4D, she said, smiling. "It's been fully cleaned." She nodded. She didn't know the unit had been fully cleaned 6 times in 3 years. The hallway was quiet again. The mirror stood tall. The glass was pristine, not a single crack or smudge. It reflected perfectly, obediently. But late at night, the new tenant heard faint noises, water running, soft footsteps, breathing. And once, just as she brushed her teeth, she caught her reflection blinking a little too early. She leaned in. Her own face stared back, pale, still, unreadable. Then the lights flickered, and in the faint humming silence, a voice rose from behind the walls. "They always lived alone, but they never died alone." Back in the records room of the city office, a file sat deep in the archive, one that had never been digitized. Yingwol Psychiatric Facility, Termination Dossier. Inside, 9 missing patient reports, 1 charred architectural sketch, and a single phrase stamped across the front in red ink. "Do not unseal." The sound began again. Soft, hollow, rhythmic. A steady thud, like a heartbeat pressed through concrete. But this time, it wasn't the mirror. It came from behind it. The new tenant, Min Seo, had lived in 4D for barely a week before she noticed it. At first, she told herself it was pipes, or construction, or maybe just her mind adjusting to the silence of living alone. But at night, when the city's hum faded, she could hear the difference. The knocks were too human. too deliberate. 3 beats, pause, 3 more. And every time she pressed her ear to the wall, the knocks stopped, as if the thing on the other side had been listening for her too. On the 7th night, the air changed. She woke to the smell of burnt metal and damp earth. The temperature had dropped so fast, her breath fogged the air. The mirror was sweating, thin trails of moisture sliding down its frame like tears. Min-seo wiped it with her sleeve. The condensation cleared just enough for her to see the faint outline of a door reflected in the glass, a door that didn't exist in her apartment. She leaned closer. The reflection shimmered, then solidified. It was no trick of light. There was a door on the other side of the wall. The next morning, she called maintenance. A man in his 40s arrived, expression flat and tired. He wore a company badge clipped to his chest that simply read, "Park." She told him what she'd seen. He smiled weakly. "Mirrors play tricks, ma'am, especially when they're backed against structural panels. You get light leaks, false depth." He trailed off when she mentioned the knocking. "Behind the mirror?" She nodded. His eyes flicked toward it, then away, as if remembering something unpleasant. "I can check the studs," he said, "but this wall's thicker than it should be. Always has been." He tapped it once with his wrench. The echo was wrong. Not solid, not empty. A muffled chamber sound. Something hollow. By noon, he'd removed part of the side molding. Underneath the drywall was not concrete, but older plaster, stained black, layered over rusted brackets. Park frowned. "This isn't from this century," he muttered. Min-seo crouched beside him. "Can we open it?" He hesitated. "You sure you wanna?" She said yes, before her brain could form the word no. He cut deeper. The air that hissed out smelled ancient, smoke, salt, and decay. When he peeled back the last section, they both froze. Behind the plaster was a pane of blackened glass, not a wall, not insulation, another mirror. But this one faced inward. Park stepped back. That's impossible." And then the knocking started again, loud, urgent, coming between the mirrors. He dropped his wrench. Something answered the knock from the other side. 3 beats, pause, 3 more. That night, Min-seo dreamed of a woman sitting in front of a mirror. The woman's face was half melted, but her eyes were steady, calm. She whispered something that Min-seo couldn't understand. The language sounded old, like a prayer reversed. When Min-seo woke, her ears were bleeding. Park didn't return the next day. His supervisor called to say he'd taken leave unexpectedly. No explanation, no note. Min-seo didn't believe it. She felt something inside the wall moving now, like the sound of someone breathing through glass. She couldn't take it anymore. That night, she took the hammer. The first strike echoed too loudly. The second cracked the frame. The third shattered something deeper. Behind the drywall, dust spilled out, gray, ash-like. She coughed, waving the air clear. And then she saw it. A space, no wider than a coffin, and in it, a single chair, bolted to the floor, facing the back of the mirror. The seat was covered in burn marks. Chains hung from the arms, melted into metal cuffs. And carved into the plaster behind the chair were deep, desperate lines that looked like they'd been written by broken fingernails. "Don't blink First. She stumbled backwards, trembling. Her flashlight flickered. A figure sat in the chair now. Not there a moment ago, but sitting, motionless. Head bowed, skin blackened, hair clinging to a skull that shouldn't have been able to move. When it raised its head, its eyes were hollow sockets, filled with shifting light. It smiled. We were only reflections once. The mirror behind Min Seo cracked from the inside. The next morning, the building manager called the unit repeatedly. No answer. When the cleaning staff entered later that week, they found the apartment perfectly clean. No tools, no dust, no sign of damage. Only one thing was different. The hallway mirror had been replaced. Brand new, untouched. And written faintly across the surface, visible only when the light flickered, were 3 words. I saw it.
It was raining the night Unha returned. The sky above Seoul sagged with weight, dark clouds pressing low, thunder rippling like distant growls. But in Tower Jade, no one heard the storm, because the building had gone silent again. Elevator buttons refused to light. Hallway bulbs blinked out one by one. Phones stopped ringing. Even the hum of electricity fell still, like every wire inside the walls was holding its breath. And deep in the heart of the building, inside Unit 4D, she waited. The mirror had healed. Its surface, once cracked and scorched, now gleamed with a false, cold smoothness. But it was no longer a reflection. It was a window, and something was already on the other side. Ji-yoon's body, or what now wore her shape, moved differently, slower, straighter, like it remembered another posture, one held long ago in a room where a woman sat bound to a chair and was forced to stare at herself until her mind split open like glass. Ji-yoon was gone. Not entirely, not yet. She was buried somewhere beneath the skin, pressed against memory, against the bones. She would wake in flashes, blinking inside her own body, hearing her own voice speak words she hadn't chosen. She would look into mirrors and find herself already there, already staring back. Once she screamed. The sound echoed only inside her skull. Her lips never moved. And Unha whispered, "This is what it feels like to be remembered." The city outside went on, oblivious. People lived, laughed, slept, even as Tower Jade began to rot from the inside. Tenants on the 4th floor reported strange drafts, a persistent burning smell. They heard crying in the pipes, a soft voice murmuring prayers from inside vents. More than one reported seeing the same woman on their floor, pale, elegant, dressed in white. But the building only had one female resident registered on level 4, and no guests. The mirror began to glow at night. Not bright, not obvious, just enough for those who passed in the dark to pause, to glance, to look too long. Those who lingered saw things, not ghosts, not ghouls, versions of themselves. A mother, a murderer, a patient, a corpse. Each flicker of reflection showed something different. One woman screamed when she saw her own body hanging behind her.
Another ran when her reflection reached forward and touched the glass before she did. But it was already too late, because Unha had crossed over. The first full possession happened 3 floors up. A college student named Yura fell asleep while watching herself cry in the bathroom mirror. She'd just ended a relationship. Her eyes were swollen, her spirit cracked. When she woke, her nails were bloody, her mirror had shattered, and on the wall behind it, written in bruised handprints, were the words, "She needed a crack." No one could explain the marks beneath her nail fingers. No one could explain why her phone only recorded her sleeping over and over from impossible angles. Ji-yoon's landlord filed a report the following week. He claimed the woman in 4D had changed. She never blinks, he said, voice shaking. She smiles like she's trying it for the first time. The police visited. She let them in. Everything looked normal. Until one officer glanced into the hallway mirror and saw himself smiling back, covered in ash. When he turned, Ji-yoon was standing too close, eyes wide, unblinking. The officer quit 2 days later, moved provinces, stopped speaking altogether. The mirror stayed. At night, Ji-yoon whispered through glass, not to people, to reflections, to other mirrors, and soon other buildings began to change. A girl in Incheon drowned in her bathtub. Her last message, "My reflection smiled first." A child in Busan covered every mirror in the house and refused to sleep unless the windows were blacked out. A janitor in Daejeon vanished on night shift. Security footage showed him walking into a mirrored elevator and never walking out. The footage stopped at 3:03 a.m. In Tower Jade, the remaining tenants began to move out, one by one. The building dimmed, floor by floor, until only one light remained, a faint red glow behind the door of 4D. And in the hallway mirror, a new crack began to spread. But this time, it didn't bleed inward. It bled outward. She stood in front of the mirror again. The glass no longer felt cold. It pulsed faintly under her hand, warm like breath, like something alive pressed just beneath the surface, waiting to be let in or let out. Ji-yoon was no longer in control, but she was still there, buried somewhere behind the smile, behind the eyes that weren't blinking, behind the words that didn't sound like her own. She could feel her body move through her apartment, smooth and practiced, like someone wearing a well-fitted mask. Her limbs moved without her. Her voice spoke without thought. Her mouth smiled when it should have trembled. She was awake, but watching, trapped inside herself, exactly where Eun-ha had once been. But tonight, something shifted. The mirror trembled, and for the first time in days, she saw herself. Not her reflection, her real self. There, in the glass, a pale version of her stood still, silent, hollow-eyed. A twin flickering behind the surface like a candle behind frosted glass. Ji-yoon stared, and it stared back. They did not move, until finally they both spoke at once. "You took too long. You blinked first." The apartment flickered like an old film reel. Walls blurred, lights pulsed. Reality warped around her like a curtain being pulled slowly upward. The mirror began to darken, not from shadow, but from depth. Its surface rippled inward, growing wider, deeper, like a tunnel pulling her in. And from within that tunnel, a whisper rose. "You opened the door. Now finish it." Ji-yoon's vision blurred. Her bones ached. And then she was no longer in her apartment. She stood inside a burned room, walls scorched, metal melted to the floor, and in the center, the chair, the one from her dreams. Empty now, but still radiating heat, still carrying the memory of 1,000 women who had once been bound to it. She turned. The mirror stood behind her, enormous, reaching from floor to ceiling, but it no longer showed her. It showed Eun-ha, alive, whole, calm, wearing Ji-yoon's face, but not her eyes. Eyes that had watched too long, eyes that remembered fire. The ritual had begun. Ji-yoon knew it without being told. The body, the chair, the mirror. 3 elements, always the same. She walked slowly toward the center of the room. Eun-ha mirrored her, step for step, but behind the glass. "You were the first to look at me without turning away. That makes you the doorway." Ji-yoon shook her head. "I'm not like you. You lied to me. I only offered you what you already wanted, to be seen, to not be forgotten. We're the same, you and I." Ji-yoon stepped toward the glass. Her hand trembled. "I'm not like you. I'm still alive." Eun-ha smiled. "Then prove it." The rules came back to her, burned into her memory like heat behind the eyes. No light, no sound, no blink. She extinguished the flame. Darkness wrapped around her, and the reflection moved. Eun-ha stepped forward from inside the glass, not just an image now, a shape, half shadow, half flame. She emerged like smoke made solid, her mouth opened slowly. "Let me in." Ji-yoon closed her eyes, but only for a moment, not a blink, a choice. And when she opened them again, she whispered, "No." The room shook, the mirror shattered, not into glass, but into light. Blinding white filled her lungs, her mind, her skin, and for the first time she saw it all. The first woman who screamed into the mirror, forced to confront her own grief. The doctor who sealed them in, convinced he was saving their souls. The fire that consumed the building, not started by accident, but by a patient desperate to end the ritual. The spirits locked inside the glass, not to heal, but to silence. And in the center of it all, Eun-ha, watching, always watching, waiting for someone to look long enough, to see her, to become her. But Ji-yoon stood firm. The glass pulsed, cracks spidered across the walls. "You can't survive this. You're only real if they remember you." Ji-yoon stepped forward, into the mirror. "No," she whispered, "I'm only real if I remember me." And just like that, the room collapsed. The walls folded inward, the mirror shattered into dust, and everything went black. When Ji-yoon opened her eyes, she was lying on the floor of her apartment, alone, breathing. The air was still. The mirror was gone. Just gone. Only a bare wall remained. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. The screen flickered. No messages, no missed calls. Everything was silent. Everything was hers again. That night, she slept for the first time in weeks. Deep, dreamless, unbroken. No footsteps, no whispers, no reflection. But in the hallway mirror, at exactly 3:03 a.m., a faint handprint appeared and slowly faded.
The apartment stayed empty for 43 days. Unit 4D. No lights, no sound, no movement. Neighbors said it felt better that way. The hallway felt lighter. The mirror stopped flickering, and the knocking finally stopped. The building manager didn't ask questions. He changed the locks, updated the listing, removed the old maintenance records. Whatever happened in there, it didn't matter anymore. Turnover was normal. People came and went. Some units just stayed cold longer than others. On the 44th day, a young man moved in. His name was Ji-hun. He was polite, clean, eager to start fresh. He signed the lease without reading it twice. Didn't ask about the last tenant. Didn't ask why the rent was so low. Just smiled, thanked the manager, and carried his boxes into the hallway alone. He paused outside the door. 4D, brushed steel numbers, freshly polished. He felt a chill run down his spine, but shook it off. The apartment looked fine. White walls, gray floors, unremarkable. He liked the layout. He liked the quiet. And when he caught his reflection in the hallway mirror, he grinned. "It's just me now," he said aloud. The words echoed softly. No one replied. That first night, he fell asleep easily, the kind of sleep that only comes after a long move. His dreams were vague, indistinct, flashes of smoke, a door closing, a woman's voice whispering from somewhere too far to hear. He awoke with a start around 3 a.m. The room was dark. Something had woken him. But all he could hear was the soft hum of the building, the buzz of distant traffic below. He stood, stretched, and stepped into the hallway for a drink. And that's when he noticed it. His reflection in the mirror wasn't moving. He paused, stared, raised his hand. His reflection did too, but late, half a second off. He laughed, nervous. Must be tired. Maybe the light was delayed. He turned off the kitchen lamp, took a sip of water, and returned to bed. Behind him, the mirror shimmered just faintly, like heat above a flame. The next morning, he found his toothbrush wet, though he hadn't used it yet. The bathroom mirror was fogged, despite no shower being run, and drawn faintly into the condensation. One word: again. He stared for a long time. His stomach twisted, but his mind shrugged it off. Condensation. The last tenant probably carved it in. The glass must have held it somehow. He wiped it clean, went about his day. That evening, the hallway light flickered once when he returned. The air felt heavy, still. He dropped his keys on the counter, took off his shoes, walked past the mirror, then stopped, turned back. Something was different. He stared, then shook his head.
"Just me," he whispered again. But his voice didn't echo. The mirror, however, did. Later that night, as he drifted into sleep, a video began playing on his phone. It had no title, no sender, just footage, silent, slow, grainy. He was watching himself sleep, but the angle was wrong, too high, like the ceiling was watching. And in the corner of the frame, someone was standing in the hallway, still, hair covering the face, arms by her side, silent. He watched as she slowly turned toward the camera and smiled. He tried to scream, but he had already closed his eyes. And in the hallway mirror, at 3:03 a.m., the reflection blinked first.